Welcome everyone to this interview with Sarah Lois Dorai, who is one of the authors I interviewed as part of the Grand Multiliteracy event 2024. Sarah is a talented filmmaker and author, and the reason I wanted to invite her is because of the language and culture she's promoting. It's an endangered language called Kelabit that is only spoken by a tribe in Malaysia. In this interview, you'll hear about Sarah's experience growing up in an English-speaking environment and what her parents did to foster a sense of belonging to the Kelabit culture, what interested her in speaking the language, and later on to promote this language and culture through her videos and her books. Because this event is around multilingual literacy, we talked about Sarah's books, but if you're interested in watching her video clips that are about the Kelabit culture, music, and where you can see traditional outfits, you can check the links in the description below. Sarah is generously giving away a set of her bilingual books, so for a chance to win them, I let you check the program in the description below. And now, stick around to enjoy this interview with Sarah Lois Dorai, a filmmaker and children's books author. Hello, Sarah, and welcome to the Grand Multiliteracy event. And thank you very much for accepting my invitation. I'm very honored to have you with us today to talk about endangered languages, the work that is done around it, and what you do to maintain the Kelabit language alive. So thank you very much for being here.
Thank you for having me, Yoshito. I'm excited. This is really cool.
And so to start with, I'd like to talk a bit about the Kelabit language and then go and talk about your own work and your books. So can you talk to us about the Kelabit language? Where is it spoken? What makes it endangered? And what's the link you have with this language?
So the Cabit language is actually a language spoken by the Cabit people, which is an indigenous Bornean tribe in Malaysia. And the population, well, the accepted number generally ranges between 6,000 to 10,000 people. Nobody knows for sure. I don't think there's been an updated number given, but it's a very, very small population and a very small tribe.
Yeah.
And because they come from the interior, the mountains and the highlands area, a lot of and what do you call that? They were not exposed to literacy. So they orally spoke their language, but there was no kind of written form. And so they did not read or write in this language. And all our stories are orally passed down. And the language is also orally passed down. How I'm connected to it? Well, I am of mixed ethnicity. My father is Malaysian Indian, and my mother belongs to the Cabit people, so she is a Cabit as well. Now, the reason it is endangered is because, first of all, we're such a small community. There's so little of us. Second is that as literacy started to be introduced into our community during my mother's generation, so this is actually still quite recent. You know, they were introduced to two languages, which is English, number one, and second would be Malay, which is our national language here in Malaysia. More people started to learn, or rather the generation of my mother started to learn Malay and English and less Kelabit, right? And they practice that's the medium of communication in schools and things as such. And then once they have received an education, they were able to leave the village and get professional jobs outside of the village. And that also contributed to less and less people using the language. Now, as these people left through migrations and things like that, they also started to marry outside of their community. And now I am a living example of that, where when you especially intermarry with different cultures, the language that you use at home also changes. And so for my family, for example, my parents spoke English at home. And so we never really learned to speak the Kelabit language. And therefore, over time, our language started to erode, for lack of a better word, and less people speak it. So the word out there is that less than a third of our whole population still speaks the Kelabit language. And I must admit, even myself, I struggle to learn it, and I am really trying now that I'm older and I understand more about it and its importance. And so UNESCO has actually classified it as endangered, as one of these indigenous languages in the world. And I think there are about 7,000 endangered languages in the world, and Kelabit is one of them.
Ah, okay. Thank you very much for the context. You told me the other day that you didn't realize when you were a child that Kelabit was an endangered language. So I was wondering what your mom was doing to help you feel like it was a like really alive language, and also in general, what was the language situation in your daily life? So did you hear a lot of Kelabit or not? And what about English and Malay?
Yeah, so I think growing up, I think I'm very fortunate because although we lived outside of the village and we lived in the city, my mother took great efforts to constantly bring us back to the village every now and then, to be exposed to the culture, to be exposed to our family, to be exposed to our language. So I wouldn't say Kelabit language was foreign to us.
Yeah,
However, it just wasn't used very much in our day-to-day speaking. So at home, our day-to-day speaking would be English, and then in schools, our mode of learning would be Malay. And I
yeah.
think my parents particularly did not want to put that kind of pressure on us to learn too many languages, I
Okay,
would
yeah,
think. However, they were very aware to keep us close to our culture. And how they did that was exposing us to different parts of our culture, whether it's going to the village or being exposed to the kind of cultural dance, or the kind of lifestyle that she used to live. She used to tell us stories about her growing up. And on top of that, we had the privilege of having my grandparents, my Kelabit grandparents, live with us for most of my life. And so hearing Kelabit is not foreign to us. And in fact, my understanding of the language is so much better than my ability to speak it, simply
okay, yeah,
because my grandparents were constantly around me and
yeah,
speaking to my mom in Kelabit. And like I mentioned earlier, previously, the Kelabit people only spoke Kelabit, but as education and integration started to happen, more and more people started to learn to speak Malay.
yeah,
And that became the common language between my generation and my grandparents' generation. So there wasn't really a need at that point of time for me to learn Kelabit to communicate with my grandparents because we both spoke Malay, right? And so that was kind of the way things happened in my home and my growing up. Definitely we were interested in the language, but I think as kids sometimes you don't really, I think if your parents don't say you have to learn this, we don't naturally pick things up sometimes. Of course, we
yeah,
pick up words, and our Kelabit grandparents try to speak to us from time to time. But somehow we didn't quite pick up speaking it.
yeah. But I guess it's good to show like the importance of the culture first before like imposing on children to speak a certain language, whether it's Calabi or another language. But because the culture gives the context, it's like why do we want to speak it? To speak with these people, to maybe take part in festivals and other cultural events. So the language is what enables to do this. But if we don't know why we would do that, like there is no reason.
Yes,
Yeah.
definitely. And I think that, I mean, I speak from a personal point of view where my parents did not put pressure on us to learn the language. And I think that was great for me. Instead, what they did was introduce me to the culture. And as I grew up, it became a choice for me to learn this language, and I think the learning process maybe meant so much more to me now
Yeah.
because how they introduced culture to me made it resonate with me when I grew up. Then I'm just like, what does my culture mean to me? What does that have to do with my identity as a person? I have grown to love the Kelabit people in my upbringing, the culture. But as I grow up, I always question, what does it mean to me? And in my searching, I found that language too plays an important role in shaping who I am, who my parents were, who my grandparents were. And I think that, like you said, the culture gives us the context and also that in point for us to discover languages later on in our lives. And so I would say, parents, don't be afraid if your kid doesn't pick up your language now, but maybe they will later,
Yeah.
So I mean, that was my journey as well.
Yeah. And so what did your parents or maybe more your mom do specifically to put you in this country? Because you said you went quite regularly back to your mom's village, but the rest of the time, how were you based in this culture?
So, I mean, besides going back to the village, I think one beautiful thing about Kelabit culture is we're a very community-based
Ah,
people. And
yeah.
even though so many people have migrated to the cities, they had actually formed like a group on their own, Kelabit people who live in the city. And my mother would bring us to interact and to mix with this group of people so that even as kids, we also are able to befriend other Kelabit children and other Kelabit people. And during these meetings, they also introduced to us how do our Kelabit traditional costume look like? You know,
Ah,
what do the Kelabit dances look like? What are our musical instruments? What are our kind of food? They would make traditional food during these meetings. And these meetings are really just Kelabit adults coming together just so that they can be in a community of family and friends and
yeah,
familiarity, I suppose, a sense of home. But including the children in that process allows that sort of assimilation, I think, and creates that interest.
yeah.
And I remember and they were quite active, this group of people. They once they used to organize these dinners called Uniquely Kelabit, where they not only celebrate their own culture, but they introduce our culture to other people because
Ah,
Malaysia is made up of so many different cultures, right? So they used to do this annual dinner where they call it Uniquely Kelabit, and they had and I remember one of the years my mother was in charge, and she sort of did like a fashion show where we would wear traditional costumes and all the kids got to be involved, and we got to wear our traditional costume and sort of like walk down an aisle of a hotel room dinner, sort of
yeah,
like a banquet hall. And I mean, just integrating all these things in the child's experience growing up, I think has an impact on our lives later.
yeah. Definitely. That's great. And you were saying that like so the Kelabit people started to realize that they needed to do something to save this endangered language when it was your mom, it started with your mom's generation. And
Mhm.
one thing that you said as well is that there was no writing before, but so by the way, you're giving away very generously some of your books, so thank you very much. And I can see here that there is some words in Kelabit. So how did how did people start to think we need to have a writing system? How does this writing system work? Is it is there like are there rules, or is it a bit about what people think it should be transcribed as? How does it work?
So I think the basis of it comes from, again, understanding that the two languages that were introduced to our people were English and Malay. And
Yeah.
both the English and Malay follow the sort of Roman manuscript, which is basically the English alphabet, right?
Yeah.
And so because that is what is commonly used in Malaysia, that is what they decided that when you would write in Kelabit, you would write it that way using the same alphabet.
Yeah.
That is one. Second is that because we're such a small community, what they were able to do was to kind of have like community discussions on what kind of words, what kind of sounds, what kind of spellings will they use to form our dictionary, so to speak, right? And at the time that I was writing this book, actually the work of the preservation of our language in written form has started way before me. And what I did was just kind of like pick up where they left off. And concurrently,
Ah,
as I was developing these books, actually the community had been working on producing a Kelabit Bible. Now,
okay.
like a Christian Bible.
Yeah.
And if you're, I mean, I think no, you don't even need to be a Christian to know that the Bible has many words, and and so because that work translating and transliterating has been happening for quite some time, I actually had a point of reference for the words to be
Ah,
used and how which kind of way to say it, because definitely when you're in a
yeah,
community, maybe somebody says, oh no, it's supposed to sound like this, or maybe it's spelled like that. But because a
yeah,
material was being produced that would be widely acceptable to most people in the community, I decided to use that as my base
I see.
to then write my books. Of course, because our community is small, maybe there will be certain differences as like depending on the place that you come from in terms of our geographic location,
Yeah.
but generally it is quite accepted, and so I think that that was a good base to follow. However, I do have some good news that actually, if I'm not mistaken, this year or last year, a Kelabit dictionary was actually published.
Ah, okay.
Not by myself, but by someone else. And I thought that that was such a great effort, because now that that
Yeah.
exists, so many more people can get into making these kinds of books for our language.
Yeah.
So that's really great.
And like you said, it's a reference. Like if you're not sure how to write a certain word, like which spelling to use, then you have somewhere to go and check.
Yes.
So, that's
Yes.
great.
And
And
and also
yeah,
it's also nice because it's a community effort. Like for
yeah,
example, like I wouldn't call myself a specialist in the Cabit language, and actually just doing these books was also a learning process for me. But it gave me that ability to, check in with my mom, who co-wrote with me some of the books.
yeah,
What do these words mean? How would you say it in this context? Things like that, and you actually get that intergenerational transfer of knowledge, not just from a language point of view, but also the culture. Because
yeah,
let's say I wrote something in the book, but contextually it doesn't fit within our culture, then my mom or my aunt would say like, no, that doesn't really make sense for the Kelabits, and if you see the books, and hopefully some of you get your hands on them, they're very culturally tailored to the Kelabit people,
yeah,
so that the people who read them can be introduced to our culture, and conversations can be had about them, although the stories are very, very, very simple. But that was the intent with those books.
yeah. So yeah, when you talk about culturally specific things, so I'm thinking about the shape of the ears, for example. Could you
Yes.
tell us a bit about what kind of work you have done on this on these books, so to make them culturally adapted to the Kelabit culture?
Sure. Yeah, I think you picked a very good example. So one example is this one right here. And if you notice the illustration on the girl's earlobes, she has long earlobes.
Yeah.
And if you were to just do a simple Google search, Google image search, on the Kelabit people, you will find pictures of women with long earlobes. And that is because part of our culture, back in the day, it was considered a sort of like a beauty practice to have
Okay.
long earlobes. And it would start as a young girl, and men also have long earlobes. And what they would do is they would hang brass earrings to
Ah,
kind of weigh down on the earlobes. And
okay.
as time passes, you would kind of add on more weights of brass earrings, and that would slowly pull down sort of the earlobes, and
Oh
and
wow.
and once it
Okay.
gets to a certain length, they kind of like, you can change it with whatever earring you like, and that's sort of a thing. But that is very specific to the Kelabit people, and some of the other villages and population that is surrounding the same geolocation of where we come from. And I think that that is something very highly identifiable to the Kelabit people, that I wanted people to instantly relate
Yeah.
to our culture and to the people and the community. And so yeah, I thought that what a better way to introduce our culture, not just to other people, but even to our own people and the generations to come, because this is no longer practiced anymore.
Yeah.
My mother's generation still had long earlobes. Some people, fun fact, got them removed.
Oh,
And
okay.
you'd say, Sarah, how does that happen? Well, it's kind of graphic, but they actually go through surgical procedures to kind of
So,
like get them to
yeah.
look like regular
Oh,
ears,
wow.
because
Okay.
you get moved to the cities and they kind of feel shy about it. And so maybe my kids will never ever see someone with long earlobes in their
That's
lifetime,
true.
or
Yeah.
grandkids. And so I think that these then become very precious artifacts, because then we can keep telling stories about our people for many
Yeah.
generations to come.
And so how did the journey start? Like, because you're a film director, and
Mhm.
then now you're publishing, so you have these three books.
Mhm.
Oh, one, two, three. So how did you have the idea of writing these books, and what was the journey of writing this book like?
Yeah, so yeah, like you mentioned, I'm a film director, and how I actually got into this was, I mean, I always search for projects that bring me close to my culture, or that I can give back to cultural preservation and revival. And
Yeah.
I had actually worked on music videos with another Kelabit artist, and she is very active in the same field of preserving the language. And so what she does is she sings songs in Cabit, and that's what she's known for. And she's also a sape player, and sape is actually the traditional musical instrument of the Cabit people, and
Okay.
some other tribes in Sarawak. And so in my collaborations with her, we produced some really beautiful music videos, and I thought that, why do I stop there? How do I extend or enlarge my level of impact on the kind of revival work that goes into preserving our language, right? Because I think that videos are important, music videos and music are important, film is important, but I think when we live in a digital space, that can go missing at any point, right?
Yeah.
Because everything's like online or in a cloud, or something could crash somewhere in the world and it would be gone.
Yeah.
And so I asked myself, what would be something that we can leave behind for generations and that would be able to physically pass down? And it occurred to me that the best way to do that is in books.
Yeah.
And I thought to myself, okay, if it's books, who is it that we want to speak to? And I think when you talk about introducing culture and introducing language, which is why I really admire what you do, Yoshito, is to
Thank you.
introduce them to children,
Yeah.
because that is when they are most curious. And that is
Yeah.
where, and we're not saying that the kids need to learn it efficiently or proficiently at that age, but what we're doing is we're introducing something to them that sparks their curiosity,
Yeah.
that introduces that culture, expands knowledge, encourages family values and family ties, and that is what
Yeah.
we are sparking. And so I thought, yeah, maybe we go down this route, and so I just tried and we did it.
That's great. Oh, wow. Okay, so you started with children's books. So what would be the right age range for these books?
So these actually, I would say, is good for ages 2 to 6.
Okay.
But I think it is good for any age. I've had adults pick up these books, curious to know
Yeah.
what the language sounds like. And I've also had adults buying them for their newly born child. Because
Ah,
the books are colorful and they're
yeah.
engaging. And even if you get them at a very young age, they can always read them later.
Yeah.
And so, although maybe a specific age range in terms of learning capacity, but really they're for anybody.
Okay. And where can we find them?
Well, at the moment, it's only available through our Instagram page, Scepter 7 Press,
Okay.
because we have limited printing,
Yeah.
and also we want to make the book available to as many people around the world as possible. So we also do international shipping if that's something that people are interested in, and we pay attention to each order as it comes. And so,
Okay.
yeah, through our Instagram page at Septa 7 Press.
Okay. Thank you very much. We put the links in the description. I probably add it on the screen as well.
Sounds perfect.
And so these are for young children. Have you planned anything for older children? Like, let's say they can already read and they have some vocabulary already, they can speak a little bit or they understand it. If they get older and they want other books, do you have a plan for that or? or
Yes,
not yet?
definitely. There is a plan for that. I think the dream is to have the kind of resources that would range from very beginner level to very advanced level in terms of proficiency,
Yeah.
so that that whole resource is available. Of course, that takes a lot of work and a lot of research, and over time, and hopefully, that is something that we would do. I think that. For me, I put a number on it and I said that the goal is to have a collection of 30 books that
Okay.
ranges from very beginner level to the most advanced. And actually, what I'm working on at the moment is to go even more basic than this. Like for these
Ah,
ones, I would say they are super, super basic because they're like very simple sentences. But what I found is that through interactions with people who pick up the book, a lot of them still would like to be introduced more to the words. And
yeah.
so the one that I'm currently working on now is just a simple picture book introducing 100 Kelabit words, you know. And
Yeah.
so that could be introduced to kids at an even younger age, just to
Yeah.
say simple words, you know, like eyes, for example, ears,
Yeah.
nose, like that. Yeah, so I think that now I'm just working backwards a little bit before I go forward,
Great.
just so that we have that complete resource.
Yeah. That looks fantastic. And so you're a great example of someone who has as a heritage language a language that's not really spoken widely. And there are many parents who are going to be following this event who might be in this situation as well, where maybe their language is not that spoken, at least in the area they live, it's not really spoken. What advice would you give to parents to make their children see the value of either learning about the language or speaking the language or just learning about the culture or to be interested in the culture? What would be your advice?
I think the first thing is don't worry too much. But also just spend time with your children. Tell them stories about yourself. I think children are most interested to know who their parents really are. And I think that
Yeah,
relationship builds love and relationship builds curiosity. And if parents can just introduce themselves to their kids from the context of where they come from and their culture, and maybe do things together. I
yeah,
think doing things together really creates a bond, and not just bonds you to your child, but also bonds your child to that memory of that culture. So when they
yeah,
grow up, they associate their culture and your language to something that is beautiful to them. And I think the reason why I really love my mother's culture, I would say, is because my mom took the time to introduce it to us and introduce herself to us, you know, tell us this is how I grew up, this is how I lived in the village, this is how it was when I was a little girl. And she
yeah,
took that time to tell us those stories, and sometimes we don't even need the storybook. Our lives are our storybooks, you know.
yeah.
And so I would really encourage parents to take the time to tell stories to your children, you know, about yourselves, about your growing up, and engage in activities that slowly introduces culture to them in an interesting way.
That's a fantastic advice. Thank you very much. And to finish this interview, I'm really curious about hearing the Kelabit language. Would you be able to pick one of your books and maybe read it to us? And
Sure.
if you could also explain what the book is about, that would be great as an introduction.
Mm-hmm. All right. I think so. There are three books, and I will choose this one right here.
Yeah.
And what it is actually, so these books are what I would call children's primers, where they're not stories per se, they're more like sentences that revolve around a certain theme. And for this particular one, the theme is to introduce the concept of family. And one of the main
Okay.
reasons I did that was, like I mentioned before, the Cabit people are a very close-knit community, and family is at the core of our belief system. And so, yeah, so I will read this one. It's called This Is My Family, or in Kelabit, it's pronounced as Ini Lun Ruyung Kude. So the Kelabit language is, I think, very limited in terms of the number of alphabets or sounds that we have, and it can
Okay.
sound kind of staccato sometimes if you listen to it. And I must apologize, first of all, and say that I'm not the most proficient in speaking it. So I apologize if any Kelabits out there are listening to this. Please forgive me. I will do my best. Okay.
Thank you very much.
So this was co-wrote by myself and my mother, and it is illustrated by somebody by the name of Trisha Go. All right. So in all the books, we always start with ownership because we want kids to really know that this book belongs to them. And so we say buku uwih ini, which basically means this is my book, or this book belongs to so and so. All right. Here we go. If you look at it, we have a picture of a man crossing a stream, and like I mentioned, we want to make it cultural, and we kind of try to depict the village a little bit. So, ini tetama kude. Tama nalan amen lam lati muit ukut nede. Ini tesinah kude. Sina nibu pade lam lati nede. Ini kinana detur kude. Do piana masa buku sekuno. Ini kinana delae kude. Do piana ngiop ebes. Ini lunruyung kude. Do buluko ngada. And at the end of the story, we have sort of a graphical explanation of keywords that we want people to take out of it. And so if you look at it here, we have the father, in Kelabit is a tama. And we have the mom, sina. And then we have the sister, kinana detur, and brother, kinana delai. And the funny thing about the language in Kelabit is that not all the time do we have words that depict particular genders. So for example, like we have sibling. So the word for sibling is kinana.
Okay.
But to describe that it's a sister, it's like girl sister. So kinana detur. Detur means girl.
Yeah.
And delae means boy. And so it's like boy sibling sort of a thing.
Nice.
And so that's how it sounds. I hope that was clear.
And can I ask you a question about the sentence structure? So it's always, this is my something. And it always starts with ini and it starts with kudi. What
Yes.
do these two words mean?
So ini it's literally like this,
Okay.
and kudi means mine or my.
Okay. Thank you very much.
And kudi is like derived from the word uwi, which means me or I.
I see.
So it's kind of like yeah.
Thank you very
conjugated, if
much.
that's
Yeah. Thank you very much for reading this book to us. And it was really lovely to speak to you and to learn a bit more about the Kelabit language and culture and your own experience. Thank you very much.
Thank you. It was my biggest pleasure.